Anita, just one last check before we get started. Can you hear me still? Anita? We can start without Anita. We can start with Anita. We can go. Somebody else can call her and try to test that out.
America watches Missouri tonight as voters decide which candidates will carry the party banners into November's election to replace Roy Blunt in the Senate. Missouri's Attorney General Eric Schmitt leads the pack of Republicans in the polls. In his ads, he wields a blowtorch. In his past, he voted like a political moderate. In this race, his rivals see a play actor using the power of his office to paper over his past and pander to a right-wing base.
And if the left wants to remake America, they're going to have to take it from our cold, dead hands.
Schmitt faces a challenge from a Capitol Hill veteran. Congresswoman Vicky Hartzler boasts the backing of Missouri's other senator, Josh Hawley, and former Senator Kip Bond.
I'm the candidate, the person who has the heart, the integrity, and the toughness that Missouri needs.
And former Governor Eric Greitens tries to mount a political comeback.
It's very clear to everybody that I am the MAGA candidate in this race who's running a positive America First campaign.
But after accusations of sexual misconduct led him to resign that office, can he overcome new allegations that he abused his wife and child? Democrats choose between three candidates with very different backgrounds, but one common theme. None of them has ever won an election. Marine veteran Lucas Kuntz won Bernie Sanders' backing.
You have to actually stand for your positions publicly and proudly.
Businessman Spencer Toder ran an activist campaign enrolling people for Medicaid and raising money for refugees.
We shouldn't be buying votes through advertisements that are written by consultants and that are pre-recorded and that have 1,000 cuts. We should be out in front of people having real conversations about how we're going to impact their lives.
And Trudy Bush Valentine, a nurse by trade and multimillionaire by name. She ran with a share of the Anheuser-Busch fortune and ran from the baggage that came with it.
We are a democracy because people can vote. And if we lose that, who are we?
And in the race for Congress, tonight's primary could decide the race in the 1st District drawn for Democrats. State Senator Steve Roberts challenges first-term incumbent Congresswoman Cori Bush. In Roberts' corner, Lacey Clay, out for revenge after Bush beat him in 2020. Roberts says he'd be more legislator, less agitator.
I'd welcome the support of anyone who agrees with my vision and goals for the city of St. Louis City and County.
Cori Bush faces her first test for re-election. The newest member of the squad calls herself a politivist. Part politician, part activist. Bush drew national attention, camping out on Capitol Hill to protest eviction and getting arrested outside the Supreme Court protesting abortion bans.
So we're here today to demand life. We're here to demand our freedoms.
In Missouri's 2nd Congressional District, Republican Ann Wagner enjoys protection from MAP's gerrymander to protect her in November. She prepares to face the winner of the Democratic primary, House Democrat Trish Gunby or Ray Reid, a Gen Z candidate making his first run for office. Congressman Blaine Luetkemeyer boasts a massive lead over a field of GOP challengers in Missouri's 3rd District. On the Democratic side, 3 candidates vying to take him on in November. And in St. Louis County, Executive Sam Page learns if he'll keep his job after a string of scandals rock county government. Page fended off heated attacks from challenger Jane Duker as Democrats brace for a fight this fall. House Republican Shamed Dogan and author Catherine Penner battle for a spot on the general election ballot to lead St. Louis County. And voters answer big ballot questions about trash, protecting whistleblowers, and funding schools. We get answers to those questions and insights from 5 on Your Side political analyst Anita Manion, NBC political director Chuck Todd, former Senator Claire McCaskill, independent candidate John Wood, and live reports from all campaign headquarters across the state. Our expanded coverage of Decision 2022 in Missouri's primary election starts now. Here is 5 on Your Side political editor Mark Maxwell.
Good evening and welcome to primary election.
Missouri as voters choose who will be the major party nominees for a number of key offices and who will compete in the general election. If you're keeping count at home, that's just 98 days away. Perhaps the most highly anticipated race in the U.S. Senate, Justina Coronel, is with the Trudy Bush Valentine campaign in St. Louis. Holden Kerwicki is with the Eric Greitens campaign in Chesterfield. Pepper Baker with the Lucas Coons campaign in Kansas City, and Sarah Maki with the Eric Schmidt race in Maryland Heights. We're going to check in with our reporters embedded in those campaigns across the state throughout this evening. We thank you for joining us. As we get started, you've noticed a bit of technical difficulties. No, there are not 7 of me or 8 of me, but we're going to get that sorted out here in just a few moments' notice. Our newsroom behind me is working as our broadcast will begin at 10 o'clock to recap the newscast and bring you those live results throughout this on our digital platforms. We thank you for joining us on the 5+ app on Amazon or on your Roku app. You can also find us on our social media streaming pages and watch along online where you can track these results for yourself as the counties start to report them. The different election authorities across Missouri, already from St. Louis County, the most populated county in Missouri, we're seeing a turnout a bit lackluster. 27% turnout from this Missouri election, the midterm election. They were hoping for at least 30%. We're seeing just 27%. We told you we have our reporters embedded in campaigns across Missouri. Later, we're going to check in with Vicki Hartzler's campaign in Harrisonville, where she's watching these results come in. There are several other big races tonight. Robert Townsend also covering the Democratic race for Missouri's 1st congressional district. That is a test between first-term incumbent Congresswoman Cori Bush and her challenger, State Senator Steve Roberts. Also, Brent Solomon in St. Louis County. He's covering that Democratic race for county executive between incumbent Sam Page and his challenger, Jane Duker. Anita Manion is also going to join us virtually. But before we do that, earlier today, we caught up with NBC News political director Chuck Todd to preview the Missouri midterms. We go now to Washington, D.C. to check in with the political director of NBC News and moderator of Meet the Press, Chuck Todd, joining us. Chuck, it's great to have you with us. Democrats and Republicans running for the Missouri Senate tell us that the control of the Senate in this midterm election could come down to the Show Me State. How real is that? And from your vantage point, what happens to Republican chances of retaking control of the Senate if they lose the Roy Blunt seat? So Anita can hear me, but she cannot hear the Chuck Todd interview.
Look, I think the numbers become much harder for the Republicans losing this Missouri seat, because at the end of the day, it shouldn't be competitive, right? A generic ballot of Missouri voters. Would you prefer a Republican representative in the Senate or a Democratic representative? You're going to get more saying Republican. But campaigns matter and candidates matter. If the former governor is the Republican nominee with Eric Greitens, you have a former Republican U.S. Attorney, John Wood, on the ballot, whose candidacy I think would get as an independent, who promises to vote, basically caucus with the Republicans if he wins. So it's sort of a second choice of a Republican mindset. If you have Greitens and then Wood with real resources, I think it creates a true three-way race, gives Democrats an opportunity to win a race that they probably on paper shouldn't. I think short of Greitens winning the nomination tonight, I'm not saying Missouri won't be closer than maybe some of the experts think nationally, but I think that it becomes a much steeper hill to climb for Democrats to find it. Because I think Republicans, I don't think there'll be as big of a group of disaffected Republicans that may vote third party that suddenly brings the number down and to a place where, say, 44% for Democrats could win. So, I think that ultimately tonight is about, does Eric Greitens get through the primary or not? If he does, everything changes, and this is definitely one of the 5 or 6 most important Senate races in the country.
You mentioned that John Wood third-party candidacy. It's interesting it sounds like you think Eric Greitens is the lightning rod that could activate his campaign, but is it, I mean, he comes from the January 6th Select Committee. Jack Danforth has sort of propped him up as the anti-Trump Republican. Are the conditions right nationwide for a third party or that middle lane to open up, or what would it take for a third party to really play spoiler or even possibly pull off an upset?
Look, I think for spoiler, I think the Greitens candidacy matters. I mean, look, at the end of the day, third-party candidacies usually have an impact on one candidate or the other. You know, the easiest one to tell you about is 2016, Gary Johnson. And if you look at what happened, his libertarian candidates, he was the former Republican governor of New Mexico. He was on the ballot as a third-party candidate. If you look at his number in 2016, and then you look at the Biden number in 2020, in just about every county in the country, that 3% that voted Gary Johnson instead of Trump or Clinton in 16 essentially handed the presidency to Trump, because by 2020, those same voters appeared to almost universally vote for Biden. And that was the difference between Biden winning Wisconsin and losing Wisconsin, winning Pennsylvania and losing Pennsylvania, winning Georgia and losing Georgia. So that is a way it has an impact. Now, do I think John Wood's candidacy, if anything north of 5% that he gets in a general election, suddenly I think makes this more of a competitive race? And I think with Greitens as the nominee, he gets a lot of financial support. I don't know what happens if Schmitt's the nominee. I think some of the more, the Danforth wing of what's left of the Missouri Republican Party and the Danforth wing, are they as animated? Do they have as much funding? I think that's the open question that I have. If Schmitt ends up the nominee and not Greitens.
Greitens was really banking on the sole or complete and total endorsement from Donald Trump. He didn't quite get it. Trump endorsed Eric. We're not sure if he meant Eric Schmitt, Eric Greitens, Eric Trump, Eric Clapton. Fill in your last name there. There's all bunch of Erics. There's even an Eric McElroy on the ballot there.
King
Trump,
of the Erics.
Yeah, a lot of Erics. Trump hedged his bets a bit there in against perhaps backing a loser and possibly seeing his endorsement value go down if he were to back a loser there. It's clear that the candidates want his endorsement, but how do you assess what a Trump endorsement is worth these days?
You know, it's so campaign specific. I think a Trump endorsement's useless in Missouri. I don't think it's doing anything. I don't think it would, I think it could help 3 or 4 points on the margins because it's so late in the process. But Trump's endorsement meant everything in some of these congressional primaries that have featured Republicans who have voted to impeach. So you can't sit here and say unilaterally the Trump endorsement is meaningless. I do think he himself has cheapened it. Things like this cheapen it. When he jumps in at the last minute to whoever's the front runner cheapens it. At the end of the day, we know why he didn't endorse Greitens all the way, because Schmitt's winning in the polls. And he doesn't want to look like he backed a loser because that does, I think, weaken him in the eyes of his supporters quite quickly. In this case, you had sort of some family connections. Donald Trump Jr. and his fiancée, Kimberly Guilfoyle, both supportive of Greitens. That's who they were behind. So I think he didn't want to disappoint. I think this is a case of a family dispute that had nothing to do with Missouri Republican politics.
Quickly, on the Democratic side of the ticket, there is a decisive race in St. Louis, the 1st Congressional District. Lacey Clay is out for revenge. He's backed a pro-police, moderate black Democrat, Steve Roberts, a state senator, against a progressive, left-leaning member of Congress, Cori Bush. He's the freshman incumbent in that district. What's the national trend that you're seeing in primary elections across the country there? Is there more energy on the progressive left or in the moderate middle?
It seems to be the higher turnout. I don't want to call it energy in the middle per se. There's certainly plenty of energy in the left still, but we've seen a higher turnout, and the higher the turnout advantage, the more moderate candidates. And I think this is where, if I'm Cori Bush, I'm a little bit nervous. I think she won in a low turnout primary last time. This is not going to have the same low turnout. There is a statewide Democratic primary race that is suddenly much more well-funded on the Senate side that I think will create a high turnout, and I think that's potentially harmful to Bush's campaign in general. And overall, we've seen this election year it's a mixed bag at best for the progressive left, but in places where sort of there's been a concerted more moderate or establishment wing of the party funding a primary candidate, we've seen that establishment candidate edge things out in these. Now, look, Cori Bush being incumbent, that adds that's a couple points of protection that you give that should help her a little bit. But, you know, if she lost tonight, I would say, boy, this is starting to look like a trend where there's some limits to the progressive movement and how successful they can be in these primary campaigns. Either way, I expect this to be a fairly close primary.
And we'll watch that closely. Roberts, of course, had a hand in the gerrymandering of that district, the drawing of the lines. He was trying to help negotiate that. Before we let you go, we asked you about the Trump endorsement, the Trump effect on this primary, but of course a midterm is often a referendum on the incumbent president. How are Democrats answering that Biden question? We saw Cori Bush clearly uncomfortable. She didn't want to say if she would back a second term for Biden before this primary. What did you read into that, her reluctance to criticize the president or really endorse him at all?
I think the issue is she was never for him in the first place. You know, most of the people in the Democratic side that have publicly been wringing their hands about Biden never were for him in the first place. I don't say that should make the president feel any better about this, but you know, it shouldn't surprise people, right? The last ones on the boat are the first ones to jump off of it, if you will. If Biden is a boat, right? They jumped on the bandwagon boat, and then now the first ones off are the ones that were never really into him in the first place. Look, Cori Bush just ideologically sees politics a lot differently than Biden does, so it would have been a surprise that she felt rallying around him. But I had a conversation with a leading progressive last week, and he put it this way: look, if the president runs for re-election as an elected member of Congress, my duty to rally around him. But then he said, I assume the president's going to show the good judgment to decide whether he's up for another 4 years, which I found that to be an interesting way to answer that question.
That was Chuck Todd joining us in Washington, D.C., the political director for NBC News and the moderator of Meet the Press. Thanks to Chuck for joining us. If you're just now joining us on our social platforms or our streaming services, we welcome you to Decision 2022. We're watching the results come in tonight. Several key races will have live coverage. We hope to have our reporters bring you a feed, video inside many of these campaign headquarters tonight, and we're going to bring you those results. If you're just now watching, there is a local race on the ballot for the executive job at the county government in St. Louis County, and it appears as though the county is now reporting the very first batch of ballots. These are perhaps some of the absentee ballots that were already waiting to be counted. Many efficient counties will have those ready and waiting to go. They'll press a button and have those results spit out. So this is far from over, very early in the process. We can tell you in that race, Sam Page, the incumbent, Jane Duker, the Democratic challenger in that primary, Page with an early lead with 67% of the vote, that just from the early and preliminary count of what we believe to be the absentee votes in St. Louis County. We thank you for joining us. Of course, all eyes in Missouri, across the country even, are on this Missouri Senate primary race, especially as the Trump endorsement of two Erics. We just heard Chuck Todd's analysis of what that might mean in Missouri, and Vicki Hartzler hoping that she has an open lane to possibly capture some of the vote there. We're going to bring you those results as election authorities across Missouri's many counties are counting up all of those and tabulating those votes as well. Of course, on the Democratic side, we have Lucas Kuntz, a Marine and military veteran who is mounting his campaign. He's run for office before. Now he's running as a Democrat against Trudy Bush Valentine for that Senate race as the Democratic nomination. And later tonight, we will also hear from John Wood, a third party or an independent candidate, really, who is running to try and play spoiler, if not win outright come November. He was an attorney on the House Select Committee to investigate the events of January 6th. John Wood has the backing of Missouri's Jack Danforth, the senator who represented Missouri for those many years. We'll also hear from Jack Danforth later tonight. Before we do, we're going to take a closer look at some of the politics that led us to this moment in the 1st Congressional District, where Cori Bush, the progressive Democrat, is hoping to fend off her first re-election challenge from Steve Roberts, the state senator who is embattled, accused of sexual assault. He claims innocence in those charges. There were some settlements there, still some explosive allegations that have hamstrung the Roberts campaign, even as he boasts a lot of political support from the moderate middle of the Democratic Party in and around the St. Louis area. Also, Jefferson City gerrymandered this first district to draw it in a way that just might give him a fighting chance. We heard from Chuck a moment ago. He expects that to possibly be a closer race than some of Cori Bush's supporters might have hoped. But we want to go and take a look. We alluded to this a minute ago with Chuck Todd, but we asked Cori Bush earlier in this campaign, maybe about 10 days to go or so, about a week to go before the primary, how she felt about President Biden. Steve Roberts had hammered her in ads, in mailers, that she had voted against a lot of the Biden agenda in office. Sometimes that's a strategy to try and get attention or to negotiate for parts of legislation you'd like to change, but she paid the price for it when it came to the ads. The Roberts campaign hitting her for some of those votes. So we wanted to test and take her temperature on where she stands in relationship with President Biden, a Democrat whose polls numbers have slumped in his first term in office. And so take a look at what we asked Cori Bush and how she responded to it just about a week ago. Do you want to see Joe Biden run for a second term? She's got to go.
Yeah,
That's an easy question. That's not going to take long. Do you want to see Joe
I
Biden?
don't want to answer that question because we have not. I don't want to answer that question.
Okay.
I mean, he's the president and he has the right to run for a second term. Absolutely. But I don't want to. I'd rather you not do that. Answer the question.
Like 2 minutes to be in the car. The Congresswoman did have an event to get to after that, but again, you see her reaction. We're joined now. We can see Anita Manion on our screen. Anita, it's great to have you, our political analyst with 5 on your side, also a political science professor at the University of Missouri St. Louis. Great to see you tonight. What did you make of Cori Bush's distance from President Biden? I can see Anita and cannot hear her. We're going to have our technical folks work on that audio issue again. We can see you clearly, and we know election night is always a busy night for folks at campaigns, headquarters, and indeed in the control room as well. So they're working on bringing your audio there. We will check in with Anita throughout the night. She's been bringing us good insight and looking at some of the different ways people found their ways to polling places and more access to ballot this cycle after Missouri has made changes. Let's see. We're going to try one more time. We're going to do a live test here. I know you're joining us on our platforms. Anita, can you hear me now? I don't know. It looks like we're having some technical difficulties there. So we will check back in with Anita and several of our reporters throughout the night. Also joining us tonight later on for some insight and analysis live in studio will be former Missouri Senator Claire McCaskill. She has been a commentator on MSNBC for some time. Many of you know her, and a recognizable voice who knows this state's politics inside and out. We will ask her to evaluate the candidates who ran in the Democratic primary, the 2 most notable who raised the most money and who got the most support in the polls heading into this primary election were Lucas Kunce and Trudy Busch Valentine. We'll also ask her to evaluate the crowded Republican field of candidates. And we'll show you just some of the comments from those candidates here in a moment. Down the stretch, we saw Eric Schmidt, Eric Greitens, and Vicky Hartzler, the 3 top contenders, really duking it out, trying to earn the favor and support of former President Trump. We're going to take a look at how some of that played out in these last days down the stretch. Many of you by now, if you're watching, might have seen former President Trump give that vague endorsement to Eric, but left you to determine which last name that Eric accompanied. Both of them, Eric Schmidt, Greitens, trying to claim that endorsement for themselves. Here's a montage from the day before or right before Trump would give that endorsement, and then right after it, we're going to hear from both Greitens and Schmidt, the Erics, on Trump.
Well, it would mean a tremendous amount. Obviously, we're hopeful for President Trump's endorsement.
I'd love to have it, and it's his decision. But, I mean, I think you look at the record, I'm the America First fighter, and you got a guy, Eric Greitens, who will lose the seat.
President Trump.
There we go. We saw most of that soundbite there. What Eric Greitens would go on to say in that soundbite was that President Trump came out and slammed Eric Schmidt's campaign for, quote, dishonesty in politics, and that was his case. He was trying to make the argument that, in fact, the Eric endorsement belonged to him, not the other Eric. But Vicky Hartzler left out of the mix about a week or 2 ago, former President Trump saying that she, quote, didn't have what it takes to represent the Republican Party in the U.S. Senate. She didn't quite agree with that. Congresswoman Hartzler had a long track record of voting along with President Trump's agenda, and she tried to make that point clear. So here's how she approached the Trump endorsement. Congresswoman Vicky Hartzler talking about Donald Trump and how she hoped to win his support.
I know you've had the Trump question. What about the Trump endorsement? But what I want to know is, why would you want an endorsement from that guy after January 6th?
Is that a real question?
Yeah, why would you want endorsement from Donald Trump?
Well, because he put America back on the right path. His policies were very, very good for America. We had the strongest economy that we had ever had, the highest wage growth, the highest number of people working. That was good for America, good for American families.
You want to see Donald Trump run in 2024?
Well, I want a
So let's just do that. You're seeing there that the comments from Vicky Hartzler as she tried to attract the support of Donald Trump fell short to have results on how voters evaluated those candidates at the top of the ticket. There are several other candidates, of course, State Senator Dave Schatz also running, Congressman Billy Long and Mark McCloskey, several of those. You got to know those candidates and their positions in our 5 on Your Side voter guide throughout this election. We're going to go around the state and check in with our reporters as well to bring you those results. It's still early as we watch these results come in. Right now, the latest results as the early votes precincts, just 1% reporting very early in this race. If you're watching along on KSDK.com, you'll see these results here as well. Eric Schmidt with an early lead in the Senate Republican poll with 38% of the support. Vicky Hartzler with 30%. Eric Greitens with 16%. So we're seeing that 38% number higher than most of the polls had Eric Schmidt. That means undecided voters started to weigh in. But again, that's early, just 1% of precincts reporting early on. So those numbers could still fluctuate and change drastically before the end of the night and before this race is decided. But that's the seat that many people are watching. Remember, Senator Josh Hawley endorsing Vicky Hartzler. He warned that if Republicans were to nominate Eric Greitens, the former governor who resigned in disgrace, if Republicans were to nominate him, Josh Hawley's concern was that maybe Republicans would risk losing that seat to a Democrat and throw into question the Republican chances to retake control of the U.S. Senate. So that is on the ballot. That's one of the things we are watching for tonight in the Senate Republican primary. We also hope to bring you results from the Senate Democratic primary as well, where Lucas Kunce and Trudy Busch Valentine have been really engaged in an intense campaign and debate recently. We haven't seen as much public polling on that side of the race, so the campaign strategy will be quite fascinating to watch. We've seen Trudy Busch Valentine really lean into many of the endorsements from establishment Democrats, people that you might know, including earning the endorsement of St. Louis Mayor Tishara Jones. But would Trudy Busch Valentine win the grassroots? That's Lucas Kunce claims he has that support and showed a lot of fundraising ability and finesse as he reached out across the country, bringing in small dollar donations. Yes, one of the most prolific small dollar fundraisers in the entire country, but a lot of that money generated on social media and reaching out to voters, not just in Missouri, but all across the country who want to see Democrats defend, if not grow their lead in the Senate on Capitol Hill. Again, some of the early indications that we got around these parts is that the results, the turnout in St. Louis County was a bit lower than election officials were hoping for, just 27% turnout. They were hoping for 30, which even still is a bit lower. We're going to bring you up to speed as these results start to come in, but let's go back to that first congressional district. There was some question about who the Steve Roberts coalition was. Who exactly are the people trying to help elect Steve Roberts to Congress and help him unseat a progressive Democrat, Cori Bush? We asked him about some of those connections to some Republicans organizing dark money groups behind his campaign about 2 weeks ago. Take a listen.
Missouri State Senator Steve Roberts officially launched his bid for Congress in April, just 4 months before the August primary.
Do you enjoy the support of Congressman Clay in your bid for Congress?
I do. He's been a friend and a mentor.
On his Twitter page, former Congressman Lacey Clay encouraged his supporters to donate to the Jihad PAC, which launched last December.
Is there some revenge there on his part?
I don't think so. The Clay legacy has been one of service to St. Louis City and County.
In May, the FEC notified the Super PAC it failed to file its financial reports before the April deadline. It missed another July filing deadline while it's spending tens of thousands of dollars in ads. The Political Action Committee opened under a false name, Steve Zemich, but the phone number rang to a business owned by Paul Zemich, a longtime Republican operative in Clayton.
Are you aware of any Republicans trying to help elect you to Congress?
Not to my knowledge. Well, I mean, I'm sure there's some folks who are, by Republicans, I guess the way I think of it is, you know, I hope that people vote based off who they believe the best candidate.
Zemich said Steve Engelhardt, a longtime aide to Lacey Clay, actually founded the Super PAC, though his name appears nowhere in the founding documents. Progressives for Missouri is a different tax-exempt 501c4 backing Roberts. The IRS says that committee can, quote, engage in political campaigns on behalf of or in opposition to candidates for public office, provided it's not the organization's primary activity. Roberts' business partner and state campaign treasurer James Hill is listed as the nonprofit's treasurer. The founder of that group, Republican operative Mark Milton.
Or would you welcome the support of Republicans in your campaign?
I'd welcome the support of anyone who agrees with my vision and goals for the city of St. Louis City and County.
Mark Maxwell, 5 on your side.
There we go, our story from just a few weeks ago showing a little bit more about the Operation Lacey Clay's Revenge Tour, if you will, backing Steve Roberts. Roberts there having some support. Now, he made the argument, Steve Roberts did, that he'd be more legislator, less agitator. He made the claim that the way Cori Bush goes about her business on Capitol Hill, drawing attention to big protest movements instead of putting her head down in the halls of Congress and legislating, he painted a contrast there. She says she can do both of those things. We saw that play out in the recent protest over abortion bans across the several states. Several members of Congress staging a sit-in protest on the street right outside the Supreme Court. Cori Bush right at the middle of it all. Watch this.
Our choice! Our choice!
Missouri Congresswoman Cori Bush led a line of protesters from the U.S. Capitol to the front of the U.S. Supreme Court.
We won't go back! We won't go back!
Demonstrators voiced their opposition to the conservative court's decision to overturn Roe v. Wade, activating abortion bans in several states across the country.
You're currently participating in illegal demonstration activity. Cease and desist or you will be arrested.
Initially, Bush ignored verbal orders from police telling her to leave. Later, law enforcement escorted her to another area. A statement from her office said she was arrested.
Is she effective?
No.
State Senator Steve Roberts is challenging Bush in the August primary.
If the 1st District in Missouri elects you to Congress, would we see you out in the streets making a similar protest?
You'll see me in the Capitol filing legislation to codify Roe v. Wade to protect women's reproductive rights.
But not in the streets protesting.
You know, my focus is going to be in the Capitol and getting the work done. You know, I'm not going to be worried about my Twitter feed or next national television interview. I'm about the work.
Would you expand the court?
In general, or do you have a specific number?
Ultimately, Roberts disagreed.
There we go. Steve Roberts, some of his comments about the race with Cori Bush there. We're going to get those results here in just a moment. And later tonight, we're going to hear from John Wood, a third-party candidate, longtime Republican who's running as an independent, trying to win that Senate race in November, not on the ballot in this primary election. We also have results coming in on the Democratic side and Republican side. Let's get some of those results for you now. In the Democratic Senate race, it's still very early. A few precincts have started to report their results. We thank you for joining us on the 5+ app, either on Amazon TV, on the Roku app, or on KSDK.com on all of our social pages. We're going to hear from former Senator Claire McCaskill tonight, also a number of other guests who may join us virtually or here in studio to give us an idea on how this primary result and this night has gone. The first and early preliminary results, very early, too early to tell anything from this, just a few thousand votes counted in the Democratic primary, about 12,000 votes total so far. They're falling about 54% in the direction of Trudy Bush Valentine, 27% toward Lucas Kunce. That means there's a lot of extra votes out there. But right now, that's very early in the Democratic primary. Trudy Bush Valentine with an early lead in that race. Also, a few more precincts starting to trickle in some of their results as well. We're seeing now that Eric Schmidt is expanding his lead a little bit more. Again, very, very early in the Republican Senate primary. Eric Schmidt with 44% of the votes. Vicky Hartzler with 25 in a clear second place, far and away 9 points above Eric Greitens at 16%. These results are likely to fluctuate and change as we're seeing just the first signs. These ballots and the count, the tabulation totals coming into our newsroom here tonight. We thank you for joining us as we recap some of the closing arguments from these candidates running for federal office. We also have some big local races. We've told you about that race for county executive in St. Louis County. There are some other propositions, questions on the ballot that you voters have registered and weighed in with your opinions. We will have those results for you as well tonight. Of course, while we have you, don't forget to set your DVR or watch live our broadcast on 5 on your side, KSDK tonight at 10 o'clock. All of our live reporters set up and embedded with campaigns across Missouri. We'll have live reports for you there. We may even carry some of the speeches, the concession speeches or victory speeches of these candidates seeking high office. But as we told you earlier, we're going to have and try and check in with Anita Manion throughout the night. She's on standby, working to help us bring us analysis of some of the issues that have defined this primary race. We showed you a bit earlier many of the Republicans vying for the support of former President Donald Trump. Something interesting, we did not see Mike Pence show up or campaign with any of the Republicans running in this race. That's because perhaps many of those candidates were in fact trying to garner the support from former President Trump. And when it came to that issue of the election of 2020 and Trump's support, they were with him, not Pence, on that issue. No sign of Mike Pence in Missouri's primary, even as he campaigns for candidates in other key races in states across the country. We're going to try once more to check in with Anita Manion, our political analyst. Let's see if we can go to Anita. I don't know if Anita is joining us. Looks like we see her there now. Anita, we apologize for some of the technical difficulties in bringing you in here. Can you hear me okay?
I can. Can you hear me?
It was worth the wait. Thank you for joining us. We can. It was. I guess that's just sort of a tease in TV, in the industry here. We're just making our viewers wait to see. But we want to hear, first of all, some of our questions from viewers earlier and throughout the day was about where were their polling places. Some of them had questions. A lot of search traffic on our website was voters looking to see where do they go to vote. Help bring our audience up to speed on some of the new things about how people vote this year.
So there have been a couple changes that have affected how and where people vote. One change is redistricting. So precincts might have moved, polling places might have moved. As you know, we've been in a pandemic, so some polling places that were more privately held, or schools, sometimes they don't want folks to be there, so they've shifted. And then flooding actually closed some of those polling places as well. But the biggest change we've had is for voters in St. Louis County. So since November 2020 election, if you live in St. Louis County like I do, you can vote at any polling place in the county. So they call it Vote Anywhere. Some places call it a vote center approach. And personally, I think it's really cool. I have voted at places that are not my assigned polling place because they have an app where you can see the wait times, and you can opt to vote at any polling place. Maybe one has a shorter wait or is closer to your work. We have a polling place, a new one on campus at UMSL now, which is great. People in the community and on campus can vote there. So there have been a number of changes, and hopefully that didn't frustrate any voters today.
Very interesting. People can vote on their lunch break, a lot more easy access to the ballot box. That's always a good thing. Anita, stand by for a minute. We want to bring our voters some quick results. We told you about some of these different ballot questions. One of them is Prop S, which is about school funding. The city of St. Louis looking to borrow $160 million to expand some of the infrastructure at public schools. They're going to borrow that money, which means they would not have to raise the tax levy, the property tax levy, to pay for it. Again, this is early on in the results. So we've got some of the absentee ballots already counted. It looks like right now 3% of St. Louis city voters have voted in favor of that, borrow $160 million to expand school districts and their infrastructure in several different ways there. Also, you're going to start seeing some of the results flashing across the bottom of your screen here. We have the 1st congressional district, Bush and Steve Roberts. Early absentee vote totals there. Again, it's clear to let you know this is not anywhere near a finished cake, if you will. The results in the 1st district, a long way to go. But right now, Corey Bead, 64% to 30 for Steve Roberts, 300 votes early on in that district. But again, with low turnout, watching for to see how that race, if it might tighten. If Anita Manion, going to check back in with her just real quick to kind of give us her take. District, Corey Bush campaigning hard. As voters, I'm your congresswoman and I love you. What did you see in that message about what she's trying to convey to voters back home, Capitol Hill?
You know, Corey Bush really an effort to put St. Louis front and center when she's talking, and the shirt she wears, the on-the-ground work she does. And so I think that, you know, St. Louis I Love is part of that message that she often conveys and that really connects with her supporters. I think in addition to being the incumbent and some other scandals, an advantage that Corey Bush has in a low turnout like this seems to be is she has a real base of those folks out to the polls, then that will pretty much guarantee her reelection.
The Roberts campaign definitely had some explosive explosive allegation to get him out there. We didn't really see a lot of big endorsements from him. We didn't see events. He definitely had some supporters, people in that political bloc. But what was the challenge for Steve Roberts trying to might normally in a race like this one?
Bush is too much of an activist and isn't accomplishing things. Flyers that I got from him and some of the ads trying to connect himself with Joe Biden's strategy and really to try to capitalize on part of that.
All right, Anita Manion joining us, and we're going to continue to check in with Anita Insight and Analysis. But real quick, the race a lot of people are watching tonight is this Senate. There's this question about Eric and Donald Trump's sort of stunt to endorse Eric in general, not the specifics. How did you see that playing out? Do you think it made any difference at all, Alex?
That's a great question. It certainly got all of us talking. I'm endorsing Mark tonight. I think that when you hear maybe a little means that it was one of those sort of sly Trump, a little cutesy, but certainly both Erics, the three Erics, jumped on that right away and claimed away. There were certainly people from the Republican encouraging Trump not to endorse Eric Greitens because they see that. But there were others like Donald Trump Jr., Kimberly, really pushing for Greitens. So I think that Trump was torn in Eric.
Yeah, and it was interesting. We saw Greitens say down the road. It was interesting to see him say that he wasn't really attacking the other candidates as much. That was an interesting line we heard from Eric Greitens, and unleashed some furious attacks on Eric, Governor Quitter. I want to play some sound for you here in just a moment from Eric. 2 hours on the campaign trail, hearing the way he really went after many of these comments you heard from Eric Schmidt were also ripped from political action committees, funding them and plastering these across Missouri. Take a listen to how Eric Schmidt went on the offense stretch.
Eric Greitens, who's abused his wife, he quit on the state. He quit on UPs here in Washington. Eric Greitens took a knee and he quit on the state. So he's serious allegations. Are you saying that he shouldn't have resigned? No, I'm saying he should have accepted he resigned anyway.
There we go. Claimed he was questions from some reporters there saying that Eric Greitens shouldn't have resigned, that even despite those through it, if he was innocent, Anita, it seems like that's an argument we have.
Yeah, I don't necessarily think that ultimately he was just trying to point out that Eric Greitens, that things get tough and you've got to stick with it. Now, at the time wanted Greitens to resign, so that it seems to me that those, as some would call them, the Greitens scandals that have been launched in the last couple of weeks, I suspect that Schmidt saw that and really jumped on that in the last negative impacts on Greitens, and going into the home stretch, he could use this.
Are counting the ballots across Missouri. We hope to have some more decisive results. Take a short break and join you again on our streaming platforms. Plus app, you can the 5+ app. You can find that. We're going to back when we come back. We expect to have more of those results. We're going to hear from former Senator John Wood running that independent campaign, trying to win going to see November, all of that and much more from our guests and reporters across the state